Right, it's JP Rindfleisch, and I am here with Daniel David Wallace, who is a writer and storytelling expert who has made significant contributions to the field of creative writing. Based in Tennessee, Daniel leverages his academic background, which includes a PhD focused on innovative storytelling techniques, to teach and inspire writers worldwide. He is the creator of the character first storytelling method, which emphasizes the importance of developing strong, relatable characters to drive compelling narratives. Daniel, welcome to the Dialogue Doctor podcast.
Welcome. Thank you so much. This is great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, as I was digging into your background, was really interested in knowing how your academic experience has shaped how you tell stories.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, the the um the first part is more about how I teach stories. Like I
Yeah,
spent a lot of time in my PhD trying to work out ways to teach writing in a particular way. Um, in a way that I thought was maybe more effective, more useful for people than either the standard workshop model that I was mostly trained in my MFA, my PhD, and and also some of the methods I saw outside in the I guess the real world,
yeah,
the rest of the world. For my how I teach stories, that's a really great question, and I haven't really thought about it that much. Like I experienced so many opportunities in my PhD, my academic background to just read widely.
hmm
And that I know that in some ways you don't need to do an advanced degree for that experience. You could just have a library card. But it those years were a wonderful period of just constantly looking for new things to read or being forced to read things you might not have already picked up on. And I look back on that time with enormous fondness, that aspect of that time with enormous fondness. I can remember finding this Italo Calvino short story collection in a secondhand bookshop in the Italian market in Philadelphia, and I was trying to think of trying to think of an interesting way to tell a short story for my next workshop, and I found this amazing story with three points of view, all about the nose and scent and death. And I found that to be an incredibly powerful, it was an incredibly powerful moment. And while I am definitely no Italo Calvino, there's something magical about those kind of academic experiences where you just constantly are finding new models, new ways of designing a story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm in the same boat as you. I've just interest. Of course, I don't have the academic background, but in the same sense, I love diving into story structure, and I'm really playing with like the cozy slice of life sort of realm. So I'm really focused on like Eastern storytelling and just how different that is from a lot of that like Western style focus. So it's really fun. I could nerd about story all day.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that is very um, powerful to try to work through is that storytelling is way more varied than we might think it is.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite sort of studies, books that I read about storytelling, about novels, really stress that the novel is much older than people might think, that there are prose narratives going back a very long time. As you say, there are stories or novel-like things all over the world. And I do think that that's a very useful um, counterweight to the sort of screenwriting inspired vision of like a story must have three acts, it must do this, it must have this moment, which I think is also very powerful and very useful for people. But it's nice to have sort of spent time with just a wide range of other options.
Yeah, definitely. And you have this method you call character first method. And how does that sort of shift this traditional storytelling that we focus on now? How do we can we use a method like that? Do you mind going into that a little bit?
Yeah, I would love to. I love talking about this, and uh, I love sharing this with writers because I think it's just been so helpful for a lot of people. And that this method really, just to continue the earlier part of the conversation, it really does come
Yeah.
out of the PhD experience. And I was reading lots of different novels and criticism, and I was just increasingly thinking, like, as writers, we often, or people talking about storytelling, we often approach plot as like a structure, like
Hmm.
this event should happen first, then this other event. And there are approaches to storytelling that sort of indicate, like, well, the reader must be experiencing something too at this point. This can't just be about, us arranging these blocks that happen in a pleasing manner. There's the great famous example is like Save the Cat. There's something that happens, story that affects the reader in a particular way. And I think it's a really smart observation. Um, Character first writing is my uh, idea, my concept that the way that most people read novels, most people, reading today, again, not trying to cover every novel that's ever been written, but they are trying to read a novel via their experience of a protagonist, via their experience of a character. And so, character first, that's my name for the method. It really has nothing to do with character driven or plot driven. Those are like two
Hmm.
different things. Um, or there are, but character first is the idea that we're reading character first. We're trying to make contact with a protagonist. And if we can do that in a particular way, then we generally find the reading experience a lot easier, a lot more understandable. And as the story progresses, one way to look at plot is that our relationship with that character is developing. Just
Yeah.
like a real relationship, the plot allows that relationship to develop. Um, I can say more, but that's the kind of the basic idea.
Yeah. And I mean, I really see that as like one informs the other more or less, right? And that's like this character growth arc. We connect with that character first, as you say, and then we go on that journey with them. But it's sort of like this agreement to connect with this character in any which way possible. And this is my first, sort of interpretation of this, so it's probably very surface level. But I'm curious when looking at it, like what are the key strategies that you would recommend writers do to establish this sort of character first approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. So something that I think uh, a strategy that is really valuable for writers is to reread or to very carefully think about the early chapters of some books that you love.
Hmm.
And what I think many writers are misled by is that we remember a lot of books. We've read a lot of books and we like them and we remember them and we think, well, what happened in that book? I kind of want to deliver the similar kind of experience to my reader. And what we remember is like all the cool stuff that happened in the middle or the sort of three-quarter mark. Oh, that amazing sword fight with three, duelists and this other thing that happened. And it's very hard to remember that in the early chapters of most novels, we didn't know any of this. We didn't know who these characters were. We didn't understand how magic worked in this world. We didn't know that the character's family had this dark secret. Um, you can fill in the details that's relevant for your story. And so, what we generally experience instead in these early chapters is meeting a character who is out of balance,
Yeah.
in trouble. And through seeing them work on their own, what I call their own projects, the reader is um, both comes to care about that character, but, and this is the important part, that through spending time with that character, the reader is actually able to understand all these other things.
Hmm.
Through meeting Frodo, we're able to sort of, handle this endless list of names and geographical locations that the Lord of the Rings throws at us. Without that, it would be a real challenge. And most people would not enjoy it. And my experience is that even readers reading a book in their favorite style, their favorite, flavor, they don't like it either. Like if you say, well, you like intricate sci-fi, boom, here's how a spaceship works in my world, that most readers will put the book down. There is a sort of toolkit that they're lacking, which is this connection to this person who is thinking about what's happening, and is feeling what's going on. Um, so that's one. Can I give you another one as well?
Oh, please give as
And
many as you would like.
so related to this idea is my observation is that many writers are create protagonists who are either too eager to get started on their journey, or
Mhm.
the story sort of engineers things so they really have no choice. They are simply told, you must go over here and do this thing. And it's sort of not really that it's not really their decision in any way, or they are um presented with some kind of extreme interesting, surprising option, and they are basically happy to go along with this. um I can see why writers do this. It's a lot easier. You just sort of have a character, your main character, and then someone shows up and says, "Here's a quest in some way. Here's an interesting quest for you to go on." And the character says, "Great." And now you, the writer, can begin sketching out your big setting, showing all kinds of interesting things going on. But the problem is with that is that generally speaking, it is very psychologically unbelievable. If
Yeah.
someone showed up to me tomorrow and said, "Great news, Daniel. Drop everything. I've got an important quest for you to go on." I would not be excited. I would say,
Hmm.
"Sorry, I'm busy. I've got a lot of things I got a lot of things to handle." Um, and secondly, what happens is that um, there is a kind of strange way in which if the protagonist is too eager to go on this quest, or just too sort of open to it, the reader is left with a sort of strange question, which is like, is this actually important? If this you're sort of telling me this is important, it seems to be, because it's like, I picked up the book. There's a picture of the quest on the front cover. There's some stuff about it on the back cover. You're telling me this stuff is important, but this person seems to have embarked on it pretty happily. They don't seem to see it as that big a deal. And I'm understanding this story through my person, through my ambassador in this world. Without that person, I don't really understand what's happening. And so I'm watching this person kind of just blandly accept the story that I'm supposed to find important, and something feels like it's missing. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. It almost seems like the eagerness of the writer to jump over the reluctance to change. And I think that I can see a lot of stories where there may be this quest, but there's like this surface level thing that character wants that still prevents them from that deep internal work of change. And so they'll go, but it's more reluctance. It's more of that, like, I'll do this because it'll make so and so happy, whatever. But like, I'm not going to do that internal work. And so to drag and to, as the writer, to really craft that piece and to spend time in that piece so that we really show this, like, because humans, I think you would agree, humans are pretty reluctant to change. And
absolutely.
so there's like the like happy-go-lucky person that's just willing to drop everything. I think I've told people I've wanted to move from my house for the past like 10 years. So I'm like the clear example of someone who just like will not go move. So I definitely see what you mean, where there's like that there's that connection that can be made from that resonation of that like reluctance.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that I think is really worth paying attention to is that we sometimes, I think, are too quick to imagine our stories as movies, as films, as TV
Mm,
shows, because we live in this visual culture. Not only do we grow up watching films, but a lot of our plot structures come out of playwriting, ultimately come out of playwriting and cinema, and many of them are really powerful. But I genuinely think it is a different thing to open a book and you meet a character. You are not really seeing someone on a screen. No matter how
mm,
well the writer describes a person's hair or eyes or whatever, you are not really seeing that person the way you see Brad Pitt on the screen. And the way you are connecting to that main character is more is on a, I mean just to put it really simply, is on a deeper level. You
yeah.
are really focused on what are they yearning for? What are they what are they worried about? What are they regretting? And that is totally different to, the film starts and Brad Pitt is making an omelet for his family. Yeah, I watch Brad Pitt make an omelet for 10 minutes. I mean, yeah, make that omelet. I don't care. I'm sure he'd be like charming and likable. There's been great lines. Um, and so what I sometimes see people who follow this kind of act-based, inciting incident, I don't know what you want to call it, hero's journey type plotting, is that paradoxically, the story takes a really long time to get started.
Yeah.
And my impression of today's reader is they don't want to wait. They don't want to wait 5 pages for the story to get started. They don't want to wait 20 pages or even 50 pages. The first line, they want the story to begin on the first line. And then what I mean by that is they want to meet someone who is in a state of doing something or avoiding something, line one. And uh and that is not, I just think that that's not so important in a film where you can kind of watch the character like, I don't know, driving a car for the first,
Hmm.
2 minutes of the film. And that's kind of, it's just a different kind of experience.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like I know that I often shorthand story through a visual media, but I see exactly what you mean. And like the story that I keep thinking of as you're talking, especially with this like first part and really connecting with that character is a story that actually was the second book in a series called Lyrial, by Garth Nix. And the I made such a strong connection with that main character of just this sense of not fitting in. And like in the written piece of that, there's so many bits of the world building that you sit with that character. You recognize that she doesn't fit in, that there are so many people that are just like cruel and bullies to her and whatnot. And in a visual media, those would be really quick vignettes. They would be, one moment here, one moment over there. And really everything is kind of clarified through visual media. It's pretty obvious. But in writing, you sit in those moments. You spend time there and really feel what that character feels to really build that connection. I think that's where I'm kind of like feeling where you're talking about.
Yeah. And like sometimes when I talk about these things, people say to me, or people think that I'm saying this idea of like refusing the quest, that
Yeah.
kind of idea. And I want to stress that um that's that kind of structure can work for some stories, absolutely. But what I see in a lot of novels is that the protagonist, a lot of successful, beloved novels, is that the protagonist can take a really long time before they are interested, um, eager, devoted to the plot. Um,
Hmm.
you have a novel like Killing Floor, the first Jack Reacher novel, which is a wonderful story, wonderful storytelling, and it takes Jack Reacher the first quarter of the novel before he's like, okay, I'm going to find out who these people are. Uh, there is an incredible moment about 18% of the way through the book where a character says to him, I know what the conspiracy is. I can tell you. And Jack Reacher is a great protagonist because he says, no, thank you. Don't tell me. I don't care. I don't want to know. And by the time he's figured out that he does care, this guy's been killed, minor spoiler alert. Um, and like, but the point is that he spends a quarter of the novel not doing the thing that the novel is about.
Yeah.
I also finished in my novel reading group. We just finished reading The House in the Cerulean Sea by
Mm-hmm.
T.J. Klune. Wonderful book. And people can we can disagree exactly when this moment is, but I think we are 70% of the way through the novel, and our main character still thinks that he is on doing a regular job, that he's about to go home, uh, file his final report, and get back to his normal life.
Yeah.
And I just think that this idea of refusing the quest is true. And in some novels, that is all you need. But I think in many successful stories these days, it is just massively underselling that aspect of what makes for a good story.
Yeah. And I think that harkens back to the like doing the deeper work of looking past that surface level of whatever it is that's going to get you back to your original state versus doing the work and actually opening up or becoming this better version of oneself or a different version.
Yeah.
Uh, in terms of plot, how do you approach that?
By you mean like how I advise
With
people to.
yeah, with this character first approach and this character first method, when you go in and you teach this, how do you approach the concept of plot?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a course which I call Plotting and Planning Your Novel. And in that course, I try to construct a story out of, or I encourage people to imagine their story as containing at least three major threads. And those threads essentially come out of the main character. In some novels, that sort of the way that they come out of the main character is really obvious, um, character-driven stories. In others, there is a sort of massive setting-based story, and it's sometimes hard to see exactly how it comes out of the character, but that is still, I think, the way the reader experiences it. Something the character we meet the character, there's something they want, there's something they're suffering from, and then there's this bigger reality they are avoiding, ignoring, they don't believe in, um, or they're I don't know, they don't want it. Um,
Hmm.
and um, and so part of what I'm trying to do in that approach is help writers design a story. And just to be clear, I I am not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think
Hmm.
that ultimately, I am trying to advise people to sort of understand a kind of basic act structure because I think that's incredibly powerful. Just in terms of pacing the story, where are we when in this tale? But to look at it as um, how are these how are these choices the character is making um, adding to their problems, limiting the things they can get away with. How are they? And you mentioned before this idea of like the character sort of not facing up to how they need to change. Um, I think there's a really interesting question of like what is happening in the middle of a novel that speaks to that question of like the yes we have this kind of idea of there's a kind of external plot driven by acts, driven by stakes. But there's also this question of like, how is the character aiming themselves at the story? How are they understanding what's going on? And how are they, in a real sense, failing to live up to the challenge of the story? How are they incapable? In a story with a happy ending, we hope that they eventually get the hang of it. But uh, the presumption is that for a long period of time they are not quite getting it.
Hmm.
Um, and so, for instance, you could say something like, "Well, in a conventional story, we imagine that the end of Act Two, or the dark, where there's a kind of crisis moment, the darkest night of the soul." And one way that I like to work with that with writers is say like, so. by about halfway through the story, we the writer has probably introduced enough stuff to this protagonist. So they have a fairly good idea of what is going on. It would be a
Yeah.
strange story if, like, the character had no idea there had been a murder by halfway through. They did not realize they might be falling in love with someone by halfway through. I mean, you could do it, but it'd be a little bit odd. And yet, by the three-quarter mark, they have had some kind of real crisis.
Hmm.
So what is it about them that in really the sort of the third quarter of this novel, they are failing to process what is really at stake? Because if they could truly process it, understand it, then maybe we wouldn't have the Dark Night of the Soul on some level. Um,
Right.
Especially if we don't see this kind of crisis point as being purely external, purely just, I don't know, the police come knocking and confiscate the important toy car. But that there is something about this character that is failing to live up to this story. And if we can work that into our scenes and our chapters, we can create a really compelling middle of the story. Does that make sense?
To me, yes. I think it makes a lot of sense. Um, but I'm curious, when you teach this, what are some of those common challenges that the students that you teach face, and how do you overcome those?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one is that are many people have been misled or misguided by the show don't tell rule. And if we accept these ideas, like, when I describe these ideas in general, most people are kind of nodding, yeah, it sounds good. We need to meet one or a small number of protagonists that we cannot really experience the stakes, the setting, the puzzles of a story without access to that character. Um, the example I give is like, lots of people who love a novel are willing to buy the illustrated guide to, like, the atlas of that world, or the art collected artwork of that world. But few people go out and buy those books who don't love the novel. Like, that's
Mm.
the thing you do after you've fallen in love with the characters and the situation and the drama. And then you think, well, I want to know a bit more about all this. Um, uh, Few people read the Silmarillion first and then think, oh, I should really pick up the Lord of the Rings at some point. I should pick up the Hobbit. Uh, we generally sort of go into the story first. So that idea makes sense to a lot of people. But what follows from that is that we probably need to be getting a lot of this protagonist's thoughts. That in order for us to make the connection, we've got to really connect to this protagonist on a deep level. And yes, you can do lots of kind of clever things with people's hands shaking as they put down their coffee cup. But really, the thing you've got to do is just show their thoughts. And I think that many writers are just unaware how even the most taciturn protagonists, Jack Reacher is a great example, are constantly thinking about things. Whether or not, you have filtering words like he thought something, something, that you are constantly getting Jack Reacher's kind of commentary on what is going on. And
Yeah.
that the story without that, I'm not sure what it is. It's not really a story at all. Um, and in stories that are more character driven, a novel that I come back to endlessly is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which has incredible storytelling. And that, like, without that main character, Newland Archer, and watching him go through this process of um, trying to just get along with his society and trying to be accepted, and meet and being forced to defend and explain away this scandalous woman because it's connected to his marriage that he's trying to push through, and slowly realizing that he's falling in love with her. And then not only is he falling in love with her, but that her existence is the secret that he's been looking for his whole life, that makes his life meaningful, and that he also can't bring himself to break with his society and actually be with her. You got to just, like, show a lot of that character's thoughts. And really it has nothing to do with the very laudable idea of show don't tell as a principle, but I think that it's sort of gotten caught up with that idea in many writers' heads. And you particularly see that in dialogue. So
Yeah.
you'll be reading someone's manuscript and you'll turn to the page and there will just be a wall of dialogue. Whereas I think in a lot of like famous, whatever you want to call them, famous, beloved novels, you're getting this kind of back and forth. And the back and forth is
Mhm.
not between two characters, but is between the things that are happening in the story and the protagonist. What do they think about it? How do they react to it? And um, yeah, that's one thing that um, many writers are, that it's a challenge for many writers.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, like that's one of the things that we try to teach over at Dialogue Doctor
Yeah,
because
excellent.
obviously, in quotations is just a portion of what dialogue is. There is so much more nuance to it, and there's
Absolutely.
so much more processing to it. And I really like what you have to say about show don't tell because there was, I think, I think it may have originated from Scott Card, but I heard it from Mary Robinette Kowal to start. And it's the concept of doing away with that and switching over to something called like expanding and contracting and determining where it is appropriate. Maybe there are times where we need to just contract and convey really quickly what is happening, as you said, with, a character's thoughts or ideas, and then really expand on those moments that should drive or draw emotion. So when I'm thinking about like a romance, we don't want to contract the moments where our characters are getting together and maybe they're about to have their first kiss. We really don't want to jump over moments where we could be sitting in those feelings and like showing the reader as much as we can in those moments. But the walk there, maybe that doesn't matter because they're walking alone. So we can contract that. So yeah, that's what that made me think of.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
And like, this is this technique that I really developed from reading Jack Bickham's great book, which I know I think the dialogue doctors have talked about, Scene and Structure, where there is a way in which every action in fiction should create a reaction. And on one level, that reaction is in the story. Something happens, there's a reaction. Bickham gives this hilarious example of saying, uh, Bob threw the ball to John. John said, great weather. And Bickham says, that's bad writing because where has the ball gone? Did it vanish? Like the reader, Bickham claims that the reader is now confused. Where did John does John holding the ball? Did he, what's going on? And obviously that seems a little bit strange, but I think it is absolutely the case that it is true about character reactions. When something big happens and there is nothing on the page that says how the main character feels about it, whether that is page 1 or page 150, most readers in most novels are just suddenly, it feels like you are suddenly further away from events than you thought you were, or you're conscious of reading a book like, I'm now, I thought I was like with this story, I was with these
Yeah.
people, and now I'm reading a book because I don't fully like, okay, something happened. And it is absolutely true that probably like 1 in 10 times, you set things up like a great, some kind of great planner, and it all comes together so you can just sort of show the event and the reader perfectly understands everything, and you don't need to
Hmm.
show their actions. But that is like at most 1 in 10 of any sort of significant moments in your story. At least
Yeah.
9 out of the other things, you just need to say like how does the character react to this? And there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of techniques to make it flow smoothly. But like to me, that is like the true building block of fiction. Something happens, the character reacts. And if you can sort of build up that sequence and ideally plot it in a way, as we talked about plot earlier, plotted in a way that leads to a compelling and interesting story, then readers follow along and can feel compelled. Um, Many of us instead are sort of too eager to kind of move on to the next event, or think
Yeah.
that our job is to kind of create these events in the story. that frequently leave people cold. And if people are listening to this and trying to work out, well, what do you mean? When if you've ever handed work into a beta group or a workshop, and what you hear back is something like, I didn't get why the character did that, or I wanted this explained, that almost always is a sign that the main character is just not reacting enough.
Yep.
Because really, most readers don't actually care if the sun is 7.5 or 8. What they care about is, did this thing matter to my person?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like this was a big moment. It seems like that person was really rude about his son to my main character, but he hasn't reacted, so now I'm confused. That's what they're really getting at. Um, and I think that it's a tricky problem to solve for all of us in our own writing.
Yeah, yeah. That makes me think of, I mean, like this happens in even some of the best of the works out there. For example, I really like Dark Matter, and there is a moment in one of the chapters where something very significant happens, and then the next chapter happened, and I remember I was listening to the audiobook and I'm like, I thought X happened, but it didn't, and I like re-listened to it at least twice before I was like, oh, there was just like what you said, and now I kind of can see the picture. Like there wasn't enough processing, I don't think, because I just felt like we just skirted over a really big event. So yeah, I definitely see exactly what you're talking about. In terms of character first, and also your summit, Escape the Plot Forest, I'm really curious, how do you sort of like design these courses and these summits, and what could someone that wanted to sign up to these, what would they sort of expect when they go into these?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, you know, here I'm sort of switching gears a little bit. Like, rather than being a kind of theorist of fiction in the way we just talked about, like, how does it work? What's really going on? What's the really critical things to get right? When I'm trying to create a course or create an event, I'm really trying to think as like a teacher. So,
Mhm.
Escape the Plot Forest is my annual online event all about plot for fiction writers. And there, I'm not really trying to teach character first writing at all. My if it comes up, great. Often my own students will chime in and repeat some of my phrases and terminology things, which is great. But instead, what I'm trying to do is, how can I create a really cohesive learning experience for the attendees? What is the problem I'm trying to solve for people? Or what are the area that we're talking about? And how can I take the idea of an online summit that sometimes can feel like, I don't know, you got 20 videos to watch and they're all about something different. How can I design the event, whether through the way it's sequenced and the way it's paced, or the questions I ask, or indeed, the topics I suggest to the speakers? How can I design something that feels like a designed experience that walks people through one or two or three or more processes over the course of 4 or 5 days? That's what I'm going for. The great thing about an event of that scale is there's always things coming in that you weren't expecting. People give talks
Mhm.
that connect in ways you didn't plan for. The audience falls in love with a talk that you weren't sure if they would like, and then the talk that you thought was going to wow everybody, just it doesn't seem to quite land as the way you'd hoped. You're like, I'm in the chat room, so like, come on, this is amazing. Uh, so that's how I try to plan an event. Now, the other side of running an event, which is different to creating an online course, is that there's a there's a massive question of the atmosphere of the event. So part
Mhm.
of the learning experience, I think, for most people is feeling safe. And you can, I've had some teachers in my time who tried to like push me, who tried to be kind of create a kind of you know, writing's tough. You got to be tough. But when that worked, I was convinced of their care and concern about me. I was convinced that they sort of like, I don't, as a teacher, they sort of like loved me in some way, in a mentoring way. They thought that I was important, and I don't try to do that kind of stuff in my events. Instead, I try to make things feel very safe and comfortable and easy for people. And what that means in practice is having a very clear code of conduct and enforcing it firmly and quickly through the whole event. Um, Not trying to be like a jerk with people, but also not letting seemingly small things slide. Um, and really, like at times, like educating people on how I want the event to feel, um, even to the point that it gets people annoyed. I see people in the comments saying, "Oh, we don't need to go through this again." But I'll give you one example: is that um, in my events, often the speakers are there in the chat room. Often I pre-record the videos just for my own family situation. I can't be in front of my desk for 5 days in a row, but I'll pre-record the videos. But often the speakers will show up, and there'll be comments flying in from people, as if the speaker can't see them.
Hmm.
And I kind of want to say, like, you do know this person is like right here. So you'll see someone say like, "Oh, I don't like the way her voice sounds." And I have to be like, that is not acceptable. We
Yeah.
don't we're not going to do that here. And times people are surprised by this. But anyway, the point is that uh that's a really critical part of running a good event, is just
Yeah.
having some
Yeah.
kind of a plan, having some kind of a standard that you feel comfortable with, and then making sure that people try to, as best you can, making sure people follow it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's definitely one of the big challenges when it comes to especially online events, but just hosting events, having that sort of expectation and really enforcing it. I was at an event this past weekend, and it's so pleasant to have the reinforcing groundwork be laid at the start of a workshop, of just because the one that I went to, it was about like telling your truth through poetry. There was some like writing in it, and so it was like deep work, and there was a lot of like discussion about various topics, and so there was just some clear groundwork at the beginning of it, like you don't have to do this if you don't want to. All those sorts of things that, like, of course, but they're reaffirming to hear regardless. So no, I think that that's a really good approach. Um, I was curious though. I saw that your methods usually, especially for these events, they cater to both literary and genre writers. So how do you adapt those techniques to suit that diverse audience?
yeah, that's a great question. So I have this belief that is nonsense, but I really do believe in like what I call a golden high road of novels that covers a lot but not all of literary fiction, and a lot but not all of what people sometimes call genre fiction. And that's what I'm trying to that's what I'm trying to teach in my courses. Um, and that's also, what I'm thinking about when I create my events. I I look at and in this golden high road, like clearly like one of the early sort of ancestors of modern writing in this model would be Jane Austen, where the books are absolutely satisfying when you sort of look at them in a literary lens, but they are also beat by beat, um, sort of percentage point by percentage point, satisfying to look at as a kind of romance novel, or a sort of well plotted three-act structure. And so what I'm trying to do is, well, I don't know what I'm trying to do, but I was going to say something really grandiose, like I'm trying to, help bridge those two divides. But I'm also clear with people, like a lot of my techniques, if you don't care what your reader thinks, then a lot of my techniques are completely like meaningless. Like that's sort of the
Hmm.
baseline. Like you say, I'm going to write like uh, uh, like I'm writing a literary fiction. I don't care what the reader thinks. It's the reader's job to figure it out. Let them work it out. Then I say, you know, go with God. I salute you, but I'm not the person for you. You
Yeah.
need to find someone else to teach you. That's wonderful. Um, Similarly, I sometimes will talk about character construction, and someone will say something. Eventually, someone will put their hand up and say something like, "But what if my character's just solving puzzles?" And it's like, well, okay, that can work, but ultimately, if what you're saying is, I'm just have a character solving puzzles, then yeah, maybe some of the stuff isn't that useful, and I might not be the best teacher, I might not be the best guide. Um, I think that when we really try to imagine a reader who wants to be compelled, who wants to flow through a story, who wants to meet interesting people, and then get to know those people in a different way. I think that some of these barriers between genre and literary work start to break down. Now, yeah, like if someone says you need to teach someone how to write Gravity's Rainbow, Thomas Pynchon, that's just not something I know how to do. And I encourage that person to go off and be the next Thomas Pynchon, but uh yeah, I just, I have to know my limits.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like recognizing the common ground and then saying if, you want to write this, then maybe I'm not the right direction. And I think that's perfectly, yeah, that totally works. Um, I'm curious to know what influences you. So in terms of when you were manifesting and creating character first approach, what sort of books and what sort of authors were the inspirations behind it that if I wanted to quote unquote follow the footsteps of you and I wanted to grab the top five, what would they be?
Oh, oh,
I know I'm limiting you.
yeah.
I could have said
No,
three.
no, wonderful. Well, well, I think that one of the big elements of character first writing, and I don't, if I had more time, I would sort of make I would explain this in a more clear way. But one of the sort of real insights of character first writing is that there's a lot more repetition in fiction than we sometimes recognize. And I think that sometimes when we talk about plot structure, it gives us this feeling that what we're doing is kind of moving a character from like station to station. Now the character gets a sort of magical sword or, important job. Then they have to do this. Then they do this. But when a lot of novels, a lot of no, what a lot of novels do instead is the character is effectively repeating the same thing. And it's just the stakes are getting more serious. And a story that really, to answer your question, a story that really helped me see that is The Dead by James Joyce. I had to study it for a class, and I don't know why, but I found myself just sitting in a coffee shop circling words that repeated. And quickly, there were like a lot more words repeating than I thought they would be. And there were like whole paragraphs, scenes, paragraphs repeating. And so when people would say something like, well, just looking at the story as if it were a train ride from page one to the end, and they would say, well, it's sort of impossible to know why this ending affects us all so much. But I would get to the point where I say, well, that ending has already happened twice already. Like we've been taught how to read the ending in these
Hmm.
sort of pre-endings. It's a bit hard to explain, but like pre-endings. So that was one. The Reading the Dead was really powerful, and then another was a book which I hesitate to recommend to people, but because I don't think that it's going to be a very enjoyable reading experience. But at the time, I was like deep in reading all these books of my PhD, and so it sort of just flowed through my brain in a way that I probably now, if I picked it up, I would just recoil. But it was a book called Reading for the Plot by Peter Brooks, and I was reading a chapter, and in my memory that this was the whole chapter, but when I reread the book recently, it was like a short paragraph. So like the whole insight came out of I think, a few lines. But basically, what Brooks was talking about was with Great Expectations, and he said, in Great Expectations, there is a moment, a huge plot twist. But what's happening is not really that, like, the book seemed to be about X, but it's really about Y. Rather, there is there was a hidden plot, oh, semi-hidden plot, not really hidden, a submerged plot, his language is the unofficial plot that was to do with ghosts and convicts and shame. And that was there all along in the story. That was there from page one. And we kept being reminded of this story. But then we had what the main character thought the story was, which is about him getting rich and getting to marry the girl that he thinks he loves. And he keeps telling us that that's what the book is. But there is this moment, Brooks says, very late in the novel, where everything flips and the submerged plot rises up and becomes the official plot. And the official plot sinks down to becoming a kind of memory, regret, a sort of hope, a wish that it could have worked out the way he thought it would. And that just was incredibly powerful to me to really you just sort of, I don't know, that was a really powerful moment of like, what's actually going on in stories. Can I keep going? Can I give you asked for five. Can I keep going?
If you would like to keep going, I will definitely
All right.
listen.
All right. I'll try not to take too long, but
No, you're fine.
you know, another writer that was incredibly powerful for me was uh Anthony Trollope's novels. And Anthony Trollope, if people haven't read him, is a now relatively forgotten Victorian writer. He wrote a lot of novels. His writing practice is sort of remarkable, and he wrote dozens of novels. Um, and they are, as far as I'm aware, I haven't read them all, but I've been told that all but one of them have basically the same narrator. They have the same vision, and this narrator is really objectionable in the sense that he just tells you all the time what is going on. And so he will begin a scene and say something like, this man, a coward, was cowardly trying to decide how he would tell his mother about this cowardly thing he was about to do. And then he will run the scene. And then the narrator will pop in and say, look at him. What a coward. And I had been brought up on this kind of modernist show don't tell stuff. I had been told this over and over again. Oh, if you narrate stuff, the reader's lost. The reader won't like it. Pulls you out of the story. But I watched my classmates, and although some of us were like, he probably shouldn't be saying that, or like, is he being fair to the guy? We all enjoyed it. We actually
Hmm.
we actually appreciated the clarity. Now, I don't think that's like a model for everybody. I wouldn't recommend that today you try and write that novel, but it was just incredibly powerful to see like actually we're not watching a bunch of events. This is not a camera in this Victorian house filming all this stuff and we're just soaking it up. No, someone is telling us a story. And in today's world, that in today's novels, that person, that voice is usually the protagonist. The protagonist is usually the one doing the talking. In a Victorian novel, it's the narrator. But basically, today's protagonist is doing the same thing. And they're not sort of like editorializing as much as Trollope, but then people in the Victorian era didn't editorialize as much as Trollope either. Like people thought that he was a second-rate writer for that reason at the time. And so, that was really powerful. That was like a really powerful moment of like, oh, actually, the way I thought we were reading isn't actually how we're reading. And the things we like about novels is not actually what I was shown. Although it's perfectly, you can have a novel that's kind of an opaque mystery experience, and that can be fun. But most novels, there is a protagonist kind of guiding you through the experience, and you can see how that led to this idea of character first.
Yeah, yeah. I have two questions if you're good with time.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, my next one. So I can tell that as an academic, you probably are someone who likes to continue to learn, to continue to explore. So, what is something that you might be looking into now or diving deeper into that might be part of the future in what you're working on?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Um, I mean, as a teacher, I really, and I really do take teaching seriously. Like, I think that if you're going to talk about fiction, you're going to try and help people, you're going to sell courses, then I think it's really important to take the work of teaching seriously. That it's not
Hmm.
easy. That coming up with material that moves people, that helps you break through mental barriers, helps people explain something that people have heard about many times, but they never quite, I don't know, they couldn't apply it to their own work, and now they can. That's not easy. It requires real dedication, it requires time. Um, and so um, one thing that I'm working on right now as we speak is I'm always interested in this question of um, how sort of pre-planned should a novel be?
Mm.
What if you don't want to write an outline? Or what if you've been trying to sort of work from this kind of outline approach for a long time and it hasn't worked?
Hmm.
Um, and partly this is in my events. Like, I would talk about things, and I have a course called planning, plotting and planning a novel. And people would come to me and say, well, I don't plan my stories, so this is going to
Yeah.
be completely worthless to me. And Um, so I'm currently working on a course, a smaller course, which I'm calling, you may be the first person to hear about it, but a course
Ooh.
called A Gift for Plot. And what I'm trying to do is like take techniques that I found myself using with coaching clients, where often we've been talking about the book for a while. So it's kind of like
Mhm.
a bit meaningless to say, like, let's get back to the Act One turning point. Although that is useful, but like it's different when you've been talking to them about a book for a long time and say, okay, what question does the reader have right now? Could we write a scene that advances that question? Or did we linger long enough in that moment? Could we deliver that a piece of that moment again in a different way? And using a fairly small number of building blocks to build up a whole picture of how you might design a story. So that's something that I'm really interested in. Um, and I'm also really interested in this question of, like what is like what's working right now? Like,
Yeah.
and by right now, I mean I'm not that hip a person. So like the last 20 years. Like, and I'm doing a lot of reading I have a novel reading club called Reading with Daniel. And it's like a paid newsletter with regular meetings added in. And we read a novel, like 40 pages of novel every week, and I write like a commentary on it. And one thing that really showed me, I think, is that in a lot of successful contemporary-ish novels, the midpoint is really important. And I
Mhm.
hadn't quite grasped that, to be honest, even though I teach plot for a living, that you would get to, often like literally page halfway through, and something massive would happen.
Hmm.
Sometimes that massive thing was that famous like mirror moment where the character goes from being resisting the story to being pro the story to being sort of pursuing the story. But sometimes it would be a massive upset, or sometimes it would be the character kind of realizing like, I'm really in it now. Um, and I know this is a bit controversial with when you're talking about Lord of the Rings, because some people think the whole three books is one book. And so I want to be clear that I'm just talking about the Fellowship of the Ring here. But like the Fellowship of the Ring has this very interesting midpoint moment where um, basically it is the moment where Frodo is realizing, I can't give up the ring. I'm like unable to give up the ring, but I'm not able to resist it. Like
Yeah.
I like both. I'm not able to give it up because I wouldn't allow anyone to take it from me, and the whole world needs me to keep it. There's no one else, but I cannot withstand this pressure. And then he meets, and it's all sort of wonderfully done. He meets Bilbo at in that midpoint moment, and Bilbo is like is clearly obsessed with the ring. And there's a kind of horrible moment where Bilbo seems to be this kind of evil monster grabbing the ring from him. And it's like saying, and that was the guy that he's been waiting the whole novel to meet. Every bad moment, he's like, soon I'm going to meet Bilbo. Soon I'm going to meet Bilbo. And then he meets him, and Bilbo's like, give me the ring. Let me see it one more time. And it's like this, it's not really like a mirror moment. Like he was always sort of in the story, he was always like doing the thing. He wasn't
Right.
that reluctant a protagonist, but it's like saying, wow, he's really in it now. How's he going to get out of this one? How do you untangle this? Um, I'm reminded of halfway through The Age of Innocence where Newland Archer is getting married, and he just stands there thinking, "Oh, that's a different woman is about to enter the church." And he keeps seeing a woman that could be her, but it's not. And this woman is not the woman he's about to marry. Again, it's not really like a mirror moment. It's not like he's like, okay, now I'm gonna go find her. It's just
Hmm.
it's just like, well, how's he gonna get out of this one? Like he's about to get married and he's obsessed with someone else. And she's told him to get lost. What are they gonna like how's this gonna all pan out? So anyway, that's something that I really feel interested in. And I just think that like on a bigger meta level, I think if we want to talk about teaching writing. We want to talk about the craft, just sort of being of service to writers. It's really important to just constantly be testing your own ideas.
Oh
Is
yeah,
this
yeah.
true? Like, does this actually happen? Sometimes people will say to me, like, can I use this phrase? Can I say, can I write while in a novel? And my advice is frequently just like, well, let's get out our ebooks and let's search for that word. Does that word appear? Does that phrase appear? If we're told something, or if I suggest something, let's try and work out, does it actually happen? And of course, you select your own body of text to decide, what counts, what doesn't count. But um, I do think it's just really important not to be just repeating some kind of, um, I don't know, complex theory like a high priesthood.
Hmm.
This must happen, then this must happen, then you must do it this way. But to be constantly asking, like, well, does this actually happen? Am I explaining this right? Does this seem to fit the books that I'm reading, the books that I want to write, or the books that my students want to write? And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Um, okay, so as sort of like a wrap up, I think that I would love to know where our listeners could find you and if you have any upcoming events or anything you'd like to share.
Well, yes, that's a great question. So I absolutely in October I am hosting another plot summit, which I recommend people go to. It's a great event. We can share the link. We
Yeah,
can share
yeah,
the
we
link in
will.
the show notes. And then that event, like a lot of online summits, is just a standard business model. If you can attend the whole thing live, it is free, and there is no kind of like bonus, secret rooms that free people can't attend. You can attend the whole regular event, the main event, for free. And if you want to upgrade to a pass that's not that expensive, you can. And that gives you all kinds of other things that replays, the audio version like a podcast, transcripts, collected in the book, and many other things. So that's wonderful. I would look out for that in coming October. If people want to learn more from me, if people want to see how I teach, one great way is that I created a guide to writing a short story called The Character First Story, and it is an email-based free course that has 12 parts. It's really quite substantial now. I've been expanding it over the years. And people can sort of try that out. You'll be subscribed to my newsletter, but it's a pretty good newsletter. It's got 12,000 people on it already. But you could try the course out, see how you like it, and see if it helps you consider, think about stories. And there's lots of information in that course as well about character first writing and how I see fiction.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I'll stop the recording now.